Hello and welcome to this Master Control hosted webinar today. We're going to talk about how digitization facilitates safe and connected operations both during and beyond COVID-19 manufacturing. Before we get into our presentation today, let me just cover a couple housekeeping items. Should you have any difficulty today during the presentation, any technical difficulty, just use the chat function. There's an icon at the bottom of your screen. Just chat us and we'll work to get your issue resolved as quickly as possible. If you have any questions today, you can use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. And you can ask questions at any time during the presentation today. We will be addressing those all at the end of the presentation. If we don't get to your question today, our speakers will get back to you personally via email. And speaking of our speakers, today we have Brian Curran, who's our Senior Vice President of Strategic Growth at Master Control, and Katie Farley, who is our Manufacturing Excellence Product Manager at Master Control. And with that, I can turn it over to them.
Great. Thanks, Jen. So if we happen to say MX, translate that, and we'll try to do the same to talk about manufacturing excellence. Here's what we're going to talk about today. Super excited to be here. There's 3 bullets. Understanding how digitization resolves quality and production challenges exposed by COVID-19. COVID-19 permeates our entire lives much longer than we all thought it would. Even today, we are socially distanced. Just to provide this presentation. Second thing, we're going to learn how a digital production record system improves data integrity, operational agility, and much more than that during the presentation we'll cover. The third one is we want to talk about what that data that will result from the production record, what that data will provide. And so the advantages of using MX, Master Control's Manufacturing Excellence, analytics, AI tools, and more. But the main thing we'll start with is how COVID is affecting life science manufacturers, at least the ones we're aware of and talk to on a daily basis. So introductions, if you could start, Katie.
I can definitely do that. My name is Katie Farley, and as Jen mentioned, I am a product manager at Master Control for the Manufacturing Excellence Solution. So I have the pleasure of working directly with our customers as well as our engineering teams to help define the future of the product.
And Brian Curran, SVP of Strategic Growth. Really my focus is on Master Control MX, Manufacturing Excellence, has been for multiple years, and trying to help customers be successful with that. So the pains of the paper production process. I thought about this recently when I had to make a visit to my doctor's office. And when I approached the doctor's office, I had to fill out a form. And to do that, there was a container of pens that were sterilized. And after I was done with the pen, I had to put it into a different container. And I thought to myself, how far must our manufacturing customers go when they are dealing with these situations? It's easy enough to be remote or socially distanced while we're doing these presentations, but what about the shop floor manufacturers, and what about the operators and the people that participate in that? How far do you go, and what about the paper? If I fill out a paper and I've got a sterilized pen, but then I pass it to my next colleague, how do you sterilize the paper? Can you sterilize the paper, and what steps can you take? So it's from an empathy perspective, really it's painful for our customers to get around that, and even more reason and gives us more conviction why we should go digital. So I mentioned the handoffs, the witness, the verification, the inefficiencies, etc., and just more conviction that we absolutely have to get our life science manufacturers to a digital state.
Okay, thanks, Brian. So I'm going to get into template pain. So building out a process takes time. And when we talk about templates, it may be your master batch record or device history record. I'll use the term master template throughout this presentation. And with building out master templates, there are many difficulties commonly faced in the paper world when building out these templates. One of them is how to handle consistency across templates. So if you have a standard process that's the same through, let's say 100 products, they all go through the same line clearance or the same equipment cleaning process, how do you handle this? One way to do this is to set this up via separate forms. That way, the advantage being, if you have to make a change, you're only making that change in one location. But the downside of that is that it can be a lot of paper to handle, a lot of pages of paper that you're dealing with when you're creating the paper for a batch record run, for example. And Brian was actually telling me about a customer the other day who has some pains with this exact issue.
Yes, and they, like others, they typically think of a batch record as being singular, and they lose sight of the plurality of how many different forms and batch records have to be covered. So this individual with this customer highlighted, and they were a little bit surprised when they went through the analysis, 40% of their time is spent just creating, managing, updating, and keeping track of all of their different master templates. And so they were surprised by that. I'm personally not overly surprised because we've seen it time and time again. As customers get more and more products and they want to serve more and more markets, that means more and more paper and templates.
Yeah, we've seen customers that have a set of employees that are just devoted to creating the documents to get them ready for runs.
Yes.
Yeah. So the other way to handle this situation of similar processes across many products is to embed these forms into the different master templates that need to use them. This can solve some of the disparate paper issues, but it makes a change control a lot more difficult. So what if you have to update every master template that has a process in room 5 because you got a new piece of equipment? That can be a really long and time-consuming, painful process when you look at change control with all of those embedded processes.
And tying this into COVID, what if you have a new cleaning process and you have 1,000 templates? How do you inject that new step that must be taken? It's very painful, I'm sure. And kudos to everybody out there that's doing their very best with the paper limitations, because you guys are making it work, but it could work a whole lot better.
Yeah, good point. This is even more relevant during COVID times. The other area of difficulty with template is what we call product families. So when you have a lot of products that are very similar, maybe they vary on amount or size or the customer that they're going to or the flavor, it's also difficult to figure out how do you want to set up these templates. Is it a bunch of different templates so that you have one for each potential product variation? Or do you want to combine them so that you have maybe some unneeded sections that end up being N8 on execution? So neither option is really great. And these are just a few examples of some of the open complexities and difficulties for the people responsible for creating and managing these master templates. So looking at operator pains, operators are spending a lot of time having to deal with issues like incorrect numbering, making sure that they're NAing steps correctly, all of these little seemingly small GMP errors, but even though they seem small, they can actually lead to things that are a lot more serious, like warning letters, product recalls, unnecessary deviations that end up not only being really expensive for the organization, but just make the life of the operator that much more difficult. And there's a lot of extra things that come with a paper process that operators have to deal with, like finding people to witness and verify manual steps. So if you have a human performing a calculation with a calculator, that means you're probably going to need someone to come verify the output of that calculation. They need to ensure that instructions are followed for processes like leaving comments and ending steps and following the correct date formats. A lot of times they end up getting pulled off the line to fix something or comment on a particular issue, which just takes away from their daily work. And they're also having to deal with paper and handwriting that can be difficult to read and interpret, and also literally finding pages of paper. So if they need to reference a step or a process that happened earlier, they're having to, in some cases, find that paper and interpret whatever handwriting is on that page of paper. So all of these things just make the lives of operators more difficult. And one question that Brian and I get a lot is, do operators want to move to a digital system? Sure, paper is difficult, but they are used to it. So what does the adoption look like moving to an electronic system?
And we have several customers who have gone through this and shared with us the specific details. They also thought this was going to be a problem with their operators. And the thing I think they overlooked and we overlooked is every one of their operators is wearing or has a mini computer in their pocket, and they're accustomed to using the app on a daily basis. And so it's actually cumbersome and a burden for the operator to learn all the GMP special rules that have to be done when they're writing out on paper or correcting paper. So our experience is, yeah, they absolutely love to use the electronic system. And in the early stages, when they have a choice between the paper or the electronic system, as our customers are going through a parallel pilot, they clamor for using the electronic system so they can get away from the paper panes.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the next one then is QA review pains in the paper process. Obviously, it takes time to review and release a product after it's completed. Some companies with a really well-refined process might be looking at hours, but it's more than likely days, weeks, or even months in some cases that we've seen.
Yes, we have. And there are some instances where the company's product requires a very fast review time. One of those is radiopharmaceutical. The shelf life of that product is 5 hours. And I think we have another one that you're familiar with.
Yeah, we have another cancer immunotherapy customer, and from the time their product is complete, they have 18 hours to get it from one of their manufacturing facilities, literally inside of the patient that's receiving the treatment. So this is another example. They just do not have time to deal with any of the difficulties and delays that can come with the paper process.
And they've constructed their process or designed their processes so that they could try to meet those deadlines, but they're always bumping up against it, and it's a huge challenge. And they have to, otherwise the product is no good.
Right.
For customers that don't have that requirement or constraint, well, then that's when they get into the weeks of review times.
Yep, yeah. So one of the major problems in paper, and there's a lot of them, but issues often aren't noticed until the end of the process. And we're going to get into this a little bit later when we talk about data, but this can delay the process because oftentimes you're not finding these issues until it's already happened. So you might be creating a deviation at the end of the process and waiting for that investigation and the sign-offs as opposed to having started that a couple of days ago when it actually occurred. With the paper process, there's also just a lack of ability to be proactive around things like training checks, for example. And not only do issues take time to resolve when they're found, but there generally tends to be a lack of confidence from the quality group because there's so many things that they can't enforce, like requiring every step to be complete or a specific date format or legible handwriting. And so even when there's not an issue, the people who are doing the review feel like in a lot of cases they have to review every step. So we find that a lot of times, regardless of issues, the review time is tedious. And really what this results in is those important resources being tied up in paperwork instead of focusing on things that actually improve the quality of the product itself.
Actually two more comments before you switch. One, I realized I said shelf life. I should have said half-life. And then the other thing is we haven't talked about the business impact. One of the things I like to say is when is a life sciences product ready to ship? It's not when it's manufactured or when it's finished goods. It's actually when the paperwork is done. So while this review work is going on, it means you have finished goods sitting on the shelf somewhere waiting to ship. And if we can shorten that, then dramatic improvements to business financial numbers.
Okay, so remote connectivity. This is something we heard a lot about in 2020 and of course going into 2021 as well. Feels like almost overnight, we had hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who were encouraged to work remotely if they could. And that's coming up on a year ago, isn't it?
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, that is
I'm wearing
crazy.
this because I'm tired of wearing hoodies.
And this transition to working remotely was certainly more difficult on some organizations than others. So tech companies, for example, like a Google or a Facebook, they more than likely already had processes in place to facilitate remote working. Their employees more than likely had laptops and the ability to VPN in from their home, versus a lot of our customers in life science just have not been in a situation before where they've been required or encouraged to work remotely. And so this was an entirely new undertaking for them. And certainly there are certain employees within engineering and manufacturing that have to be on the shop floor just because of the nature of manufacturing the physical product. However, and as many of our customers are learning, there are individuals in certain roles that really can work from anywhere, but that's only if a digital system is set up to actually enable that work. And so COVID-19 has really highlighted the need for digitization so workers are able to actually perform their job from anywhere.
So I'd like to highlight an analyst quote here. Although hourly workers, it's a quote and a projection, although hourly workers are needed on site for specialist tasks and essential services, by 2024, Gartner says 50% of factory work will be done remotely. And COVID is accelerating that. I think the trend was already heading in that direction. COVID, as Katie mentioned, forced companies into this position. But the one thing I'd like to emphasize is life science manufacturers, unlike a lot of other manufacturers, are still using the paper-based batch record or the device history record. And so sometimes life science manufacturers are laggards to adopt the technology and digitize. So I don't think 50% of the work for life science manufacturers, I don't think that number is low enough for the life science manufacturers. But we'll see, time will tell in 2024. And COVID-19 alone may not justify going digital, but in many ways, because of all the other pains, it could be the straw that's the breaks the camel's back. It could be the reason, and we're seeing this with some of our customers, it could be the reason that they finally say, we have to go digital. And all of the other pains that we talked about, the operator pains, the review pains, all of those have been known, but they're still using paper for some reason.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how things look in a couple of years.
Absolutely, and a couple of months, hopefully, in terms of not, and I should correct myself, I do enjoy wearing hoodies, but it is good to get back into something other than a hoodie.
To have a reason to get out of our pajamas.
Absolutely, yeah. And out of the basement office. Okay, so let's talk about visibility with digitized connectivity. This is something I like to relate to our personal lives. When I order a Domino's pizza and when you order a Domino's pizza, you're probably familiar with the app that they give, and they tell you who's making the ingredients, who's putting it into the oven, when it's about ready to be done. I see this in Amazon too. They tell you it's expected tomorrow, it's 10 stops away, it's 5 stops away. These are becoming commonplace, and so when we look at the trends, we think consumers are going to get accustomed to that, but it's not the case with our life science manufacturers who are using paper. There is no visibility, and when you look at the first bullet, who has visibility of paper on the shop floor? It's basically the person that's in front of the piece of the paper. Anybody else on the shop floor can't see the same piece of paper. Somebody that's remote and trying to monitor can't see the paper. And so one of our customers, just from a storytelling perspective, is in a role where they oversee production and number of lines, and told us that he spent literally decades, so 20 plus years, thinking he had to be on site every day, many hours, because they run multiple shifts. And COVID has led him to be remote. So now he realizes, like many others I'm sure, he can perform his job. He still goes on site sometime, but he doesn't have to be there nearly as much.
Okay, improve collaboration across sites. So this is, of course, critical to working remotely successfully. And the ability to continue working effectively from a remote location is critical. And when we say across sites, I suppose that's an interesting phrase because that's always been the case, where if you're at a different site, you're not in the same location, but it can be a little bit different now with COVID, where a cross-site may actually look the same as a relationship you have now with the coworker that used to be right across from you. And so they may just be across town, but now you're facing a similar need for collaboration and communication with employees that you were previously in the same office with, as with the employees that might be across the globe. So whether it's collaborating on SOPs or work instructions, creating master templates, these are the things that become really difficult to collaborate on in a paper process. So the first bullet there provides secure access to employees located around the world, as well as people who need access to certain information. So one example that comes to mind is one of our customers that was able to pass an NSF audit 100% remotely. So they created a login for the auditor, so the auditor could log into the master control system. In this case, they had access to all the documents that they needed for that specific audit. Any on-the-fly requests were placed into the folder, and everyone was able to facilitate this process 100% remotely, which is pretty amazing. I also have another quote that I'd like to read from a customer of ours, and she said, "Myself and others that created the batches for production and also reviewed and released batches for production were able to work 24/7 to keep the schedule as promised and the work flowing. Without the MX software, we really would have been at a standstill with having to have batches released only when the staff was on site." So having the MX software in place going into the pandemic was really critical for them to keep moving and get their product to their customers. And then another example that comes to mind in terms of uniform processes across sites, we have a large medical device customer, Carestream Health, with over 4,000 employees across the globe. And through their implementation of master control, they were able to continue collaborating on the creation of the master templates throughout their implementation, as well as feel more confident that the same standard processes were being followed across sites.
So let's look at some of the outcomes of a connected paperless shop floor.
Okay, streamline master template management. So when a master template is created in a single digital system, this enables both the ability to collaborate within that system, but also to have the approvals and the revision history all in one location and give access to those who need it. So that alone is a great advantage that you really don't have if you're working with Word or another way to build templates. One of the other major advantages is what we at Master Control call global elements, and this is our solution to the form issue that I brought up in an earlier slide, where how do you handle having these processes that are similar, that are referenced by many products? And the way that you can do that in a digital system really takes the best of both worlds to just create that template one time and then essentially have it be dynamically referenced by the products that actually consume it. And if you make a change, you only have to make that change in one location, and it's going to essentially propagate to everywhere that it's needed. So this has been extremely well received by our customer base as a way to verify consistency across their products and also just a general time savings as well. The other issue I brought up on paper is how do you handle product families when you have those products that are very similar? And the way that we handle that in a digital system is to just create the initial base template or just an initial product, and then all you need to do is find those locations that might be specific to the variation. So if you're adding a flavor or a dye that might be specific to grape flavor, and just indicate what is different when I'm manufacturing grape flavor as opposed to berry flavor, and all of this happens seamlessly within one master template without having unnecessary steps displayed to the operator. And then on top of this, there's the ability to configure settings and enforce needed requirements. So for example, if someone's entering a pH, is there any reason to allow them to enter a value that's outside of 0 or 14? So having all of these configurations can make the life easier for the builder as well. And speaking of product families, actually, there was one example that we were talking about recently.
Easier for the builder, but also easier for the team of builders in many cases. So most customers will want to take an existing product. They don't want to stay as a one product company. They want to take that product and deliver it in different flavors or sizes or quantities or dosage amounts. It's any number of variables. Well, each one of those variables, maybe they have 3 flavors and 5 sizes, and the numbers themselves seem pretty small, but very quickly those numbers turns into hundreds and then thousands of SKUs. So it's pretty easy for the ERP to manage thousands of SKUs. We have one customer who has 4,000 SKUs. If they don't have these kinds of capabilities to streamline the master template management, then they have to create and manage 4,000 templates. It's really not possible. So over the last 20 years, they've built up 4,000 master templates on paper, but now how do they go digital? Well, using one of these tools called Product Families, instead of creating and managing 4,000 templates, they'll be able to reduce that by 100-fold. So it'll be less than 100. We're hoping for 40 or 50 master templates to cover all 4,000 SKUs. And that's more common than you would imagine across the customers.
Yeah, great. Okay, improved data integrity means greater right first time, shorter reviews, and higher product quality. So this is one of the strongest motivators for customers looking to move to a digital system. And the accuracy and consistency of those paper batch records is an ongoing difficulty for many. And these are some of the advantages that a digital system can offer pretty much immediately in terms of improving the data integrity of the information that's entered into the batch record or the device history record. One major advantage right away is to help eliminate some of that human error, which of course is going to happen when you not only have operators writing on paper, but you also have a lot of manual transfer from one system to another, maybe material information, things like that. You're also leaving open a lot of room for issues to occur. Other advantages of an electronic system in terms of data integrity, and there are so many, I'm just naming a few here that come to mind. So one would be calculations, to have a validated system automatically perform the calculation as soon as all of the inputs are available, to automatically record Part 11 compliant signatures, to allow limits to be configured around numeric entries and then configure certain actions depending on the value that's entered, to better facilitate conditional paths and have steps be automatically unnamed when they're not needed, to be able to assign roles to certain steps to ensure that it's always the correct person or group of people that are completing a step, to assign witness and verify and have the system ensure that that person has also not completed a step that they're witnessing and verifying. So all of these things add up to really a huge improvement in data integrity and some of those important metrics like right first time, reducing corrections, things like that.
Yeah, just from a fun perspective, we recently heard of a prospect who claimed there just are some people who should not be on the shop floor because you can't read their handwriting. Personally, I understand this. I have 4 kids. 2 of my kids, I just ask them to email me because I really can't read their writing. So it's more common than I think we assume, and most of us, myself mainly, I'm used to emailing and autocorrect and everything that comes with the digital world. I don't want to deal with paper and handwriting, and I think our customers have to deal with that as they hire operators.
Yeah, we see that with a lot of paper examples we get from customers.
Yes,
a lot
we
of
do.
Initials and just thinking, how do they interpret what those letters are?
So this next positive outcome, reducing deviations, CAPAs, and overall time spent chasing the folders. Master Control has been in business for a long time with a quality management system. And so for the last 20 years, our quality management system has helped our customers better manage CAPAs, deviations, do it more efficiently, go from paper, form-based to digital. But what I really like about being in the manufacturing space is, well, while we can help customers be good at managing those problems, it would be even better if we could help them reduce so they don't have to manage as many. And so we have several of our customers. I was actually researching one of our competitors last night in the manufacturing space. They claim that human error leads to 20% of deviations. It's a believable number for us because we have a customer who predicts that 30% of their deviations are caused by human error and will be avoided by implementing Master Control MX. And so really the goal, yes, we want to help customers manage these problems when they do happen, but ideally we improve product quality before they ever happen.
Yeah.
Could you comment on the chasing the folders comment?
On the chasing the folders comment. Well, one thing I was going to mention is when you have your QMS and your manufacturing system integrated, as with the Master Control solution, when you do need to launch a form, although hopefully it's a reduced amount of times, you do have that automatic connection within the system. So a link into the form itself, you can see the status of the form directly from the electronic record in Master Control. So those integration points, although of course we hope that they are lessened, they are valuable when they do occur.
And the chasing the folders comment is what we hear is a common pain that Going Digital solves, and the feature Katie just mentioned. At the end of the production run, somebody has to figure out if everybody was trained correctly and where those deviations are and what the status of that. And we hear customers say what that really means is they chase the folders. They have to chase where those people, where the folders are and what the papers is. And so the outcome, positive outcome, is alleviating chasing the folders.
Yeah, when we talk about the form integration, a lot of customers' first questions is, oh, can I configure that the form has to be complete before it can be signed off on? So these are difficulties that they're dealing with, of finding it, making sure it's complete. And by the way, that is something that you can do.
Next one. So streamline production, reduce unplanned downtime and delays. And the thing I wanted to focus on here is so often when we hear downtime, my mindset, and I think most of the customers, downtime means, oh, a big failure, I've got a piece of equipment, it's down, production is stopped. Well, the title of this one is Optimizing Manufacturing Production Processes. And so what people often overlook with the paper-based batch record are the delays. Yeah, maybe the line hasn't stopped, but I've got to go find somebody to oversee this process and do their signature because they're not using a digital system, they're not here, they can't do it from their home. It introduces many delays throughout the process that by going digital, we can make the overall process much more efficient.
So looking at traceability, so once you have all of your data in one location, it's really going to open up a world of opportunities in terms of visibility and traceability. And when Brian and I were discussing this slide, there was an example that came to mind.
Yes, and so traceability to me means can you find what you need when you need to find it? And with paper-based records in bankers' boxes, you can't really search that. You have to just go scour the boxes and hope to find the right box and the right folder. But from a consumer perspective, things are changing. So, for example, I recently had to change my air filter in one of my vehicles. And historically, that means I would go to the manufacturer's site or look at the manual, go look to see what filter was recommended, then try to map that to what the store had available. It's kind of a lengthy process. With improved traceability in Amazon, I just go look to see what I bought 6 months ago or 12 months ago. It's super easy to find out. And I think there's a good parallel. When you need to find something with a batch record, traceability means can you go search and find out what you used 6 months, 12 months ago? And if you can, it'll be way faster than going to the manufacturer's manual and trying to figure out what the filter is you need.
Yeah, and not only will they tell you easily which one it was, they might even recommend to you that it's time for a new one before you even realize that was the case.
Yes, now you're jumping to the predictive part.
Yeah,
of the
that's right. I'm
presentation.
getting ahead of myself. So the first question is, can you search paper? And I think many of you know the answer is you can search paper, but it's probably going to be painful and take quite a bit of time. So when you have all of that data digitized, the historical data is available within just a few clicks. And one really common use cases that I hear from a lot of customers, either as a motivation to go digital or some benefits after they've gone digital, is just the simple scenario of I need to see where this is used. Maybe it's a material lot number or a patient ID. And in a digital system, just being able to go in and type in whatever you're looking for and have the results come back within a few seconds seems simple. A lot of us expect that for other things like Amazon, but when you're used to paper, that's a huge differentiator and can be a really big time savings. And then once you have your electronic batch record, your device history record digitized, you can then have the opportunity to integrate your digital systems with other enterprise systems that hold the source of truth, for example, material information in an ERP system. So with an integration to your batch record or your device history record, you can do things like exchange material information, ensure that the material is being used is the one that's actually been allocated within the ERP system, as well as do things like update the ERP system after consumption and have all of that taking place automatically, so you're eliminating any dual entry and room for error. Equipment calibration systems might be another example of an integration point, as well as maybe getting a reading from a piece of equipment. So all of these things become available options to you, but only at the point where you actually have moved away from paper and have all of this housed in a digital system.
So I love this quote from Robin. He highlights, from an outcomes perspective, he highlights how important it is to be able to focus on the right things instead of the paper. And from day one, his management team knew the number one goal was getting rid of the paper so they could focus on the work. And I look at this, and I'm sure every one of the customers out there is experiencing this. We have to teach our operators how to deal with and correct items in a GMP basis. We have to deal with the builders or master template makers learning how to do it on paper, instead of spending time thinking about how do I make a better, more improved, higher quality product? How can I make this go faster? We spend too much time, as Wellington highlight, we spend too much time worrying about and trying to get around the paper problems.
Yeah, exactly. Like the customer you mentioned earlier that's spending 40% of their quality time getting paperwork ready for execution.
Yes.
So yeah, absolutely. A digital system makes production record processes, of course, more efficient. These are a lot of the things that we've pointed out in the last 5 slides. What all of these benefits really result in is people have more time to be applied in much more efficient and beneficial ways. So the quality group is actually able to have time to focus on improving the quality of the product and the processes in the organization, not necessarily just chasing folders, tracking down people to correct signatures, doing reactive training checks. And so that's really the idea here, is to open up this information, or excuse me, open up this time for people to do things of value.
So let's dive into something near and dear to our hearts. It's connected data. And when we say data, even when we talk about batch records, and we think that's a document. When we ask a customer to show us one of their batch records, it comes across as a document. But we look at the world through a different lens. You could call it a data lens. Instead of looking at it as a 50-page document or a 100-page document, it is a document that collects or contains 300 data elements. And once you look at the world through that lens, then you can start thinking about, what can I do with that data? If it's not locked up in banker's boxes and it's actually accessible, it's great that it's searchable, but going beyond just being able to search it, what can we do with it? That's what we'll cover here. So this is a little bit of a leap, and I'll explain. I'm going to argue that COVID-19 leads to continuous improvement, and I have a couple more slides that will explain what I mean by this.
Do you mean like the example of the employee who'd worked in the office for decades and then finally was able to?
Certainly, that is one example, but that's not exactly the example I was thinking
All right,
about.
let's hear it then.
Okay. So what's displayed on your screen right now is what I call a black box. And in process mapping, the 3-step process is you have your inputs, and you have your process, and you have your outputs. And in my contention is life science manufacturers deal with a black box because it's paper. All of that data of what's happening, who's signing off, when, how long it's taking, 300 various data collections. I threw out 300 because that's an average. Some of our customers have over 1,000 steps in their process. It's kind of a black box because it's on paper and you can't see what's in there and you can't benefit from that data. And so it really constrains continuous improvement initiatives, because if you don't know where your problems are or where your slowness is, How can you feed that as an input to your continuous improvement? So next slide is the digitized approach. And the designers, shout out to the designers, making this look really good for us. What this is intended to show is now we can, with a digital system, we can see into the process. We can actually see what's happening when we have the visibility, but more than the visibility, we have access to all of that data. So in a strange turn of events, if COVID leads us to be more digital, and digital allows us to get access to the data, then you could argue COVID leads to continuous improvement because that data is going to help with our continuous improvement initiatives.
I think I got it.
Thanks. I know it's a stretch. That's why I said leap. It's a little bit of a leap. One thing I do want to emphasize, our life science manufacturers, our industry requires it, and they do a stand-up job. They document the processes, what the process needs to do, and what actually happens better than arguably any other industry. And so I don't want it to come across as slamming, oh, we don't know what's going on there. That's not the case. The problem is you know exactly what's going on a one run, production run, one lot at a time, and you don't have access to the data. Here's a specific example of what you could do if you did have access to that data, if that black box wasn't a black box. This is just one example. This is showing different steps in a process. As I mentioned, our average is 300 steps. The screen is only showing 20-ish, maybe 15. So it's a little bit simplified. But to show what's happening here, each one of those columns represents an individual step. And the blue bars represent the time required to perform that step. And the yellow bar represents the time on average historically. So you can very quickly and easily see that the blue bar in the middle, that took longer than normal. And so if you know about that ahead of time, you might be able to predict that your end production run is going to be delayed. And if you can do that, maybe you can avoid some expedited shipping. Maybe you can notify your customer. And maybe you can go back and let's reevaluate that middle step. Why did it take longer this time? Is there a systemic problem? Or is it just a one-off? So this is just one example of what you might be able to do with the data. So with that data, we have what we would like to call optimization opportunities with some buzzwords called machine learning, data, artificial intelligence. I won't go into describing what those are. We will have more webinars later this year for a product that we call Master Control Insights that will provide much more detail about that. But the main thing, the main takeaway today is uncovering the data and revealing the data that right now is locked up and not accessible is a key input to doing machine learning and artificial intelligence and gaining the benefits of that, which is better predictions and better outcomes.
Great. Looking at preventing issues, a digital system is going to allow for the opportunity to be proactive. So in this example here, you see employees with training due within the master control system, and then making that connection to what specific product that might apply to based on maybe a work instruction that's within that product and a new revision on the work instruction and needing the employee to retrain. So this is capability that you can have almost immediately once you've integrated to a digital system, but as we look at moving forward with more machine learning and AI initiatives, we can go even further with concepts like this to be more proactive and prevent issues that might have occurred without anyone noticing. So maybe an employee, for example, is not overdue on their training today, but over the weekend when they come in for their shift on Saturday when the training group is not in the office, they might be likely to be working on a product that would require them to have certain training. And the system will be able to make those types of connections that are much more than just taking a look at an overdue training report, for example. So machine learning initiatives, and Brian alluded to this, there's definitely exciting things coming in the years to come, and we will have more details to share in the future, probably entire webinars on the topic, so something to look forward to there. So we just want to touch on what some of these things might look like in the realm of the manufacturing process, specifically if you have that connected with your QMS. And so once you have an operator-centric system like Master Control that's capturing all of the actions that the operators are taking, that's capturing all of the data entry, as well as holding the information about which material was used, which piece of equipment, there's a lot that we can start to do with that information. So think of the Apple Watch and the dashboard that shows peak performance. Take that concept and apply it to the operator. So which operator performs the step the fastest or performs the process the fastest with the greatest yield? And can we go beyond an individual and start thinking about which teams seem to have the best outcomes and what other factors outside of just an individual might play into that, like the time of day. Is there a certain shift that seems to produce a better outcome, or a certain site? Both sites are producing the same product. Does one have potentially a process that's better or faster that should be adopted by the other site? Is there a supervisor who has a certain method that seems to be playing really well with a team? And so this is the kind of information that we are going to hold and be able to draw some really valuable conclusions with.
And that's what Katie described were examples within the manufacturing environment. And then if we expand that, as I mentioned earlier, we've been building QMSs for decades, and so we also have access from a master control perspective to quality data. So you could start correlating some of your manufacturing data with some of your quality data. It could be supplier-related information. Maybe there's one particular material from a given supplier that when we use that, our production yield increases. Maybe it's planned deviations, looking at it a little bit more negatively. So we've got planned deviations that are in play. When 3 of these last 4 planned deviations were in play, what happened to our production run? Did it go longer? Did it go shorter? All of those kinds of capabilities we'll be able to start correlating across the manufacturing and quality data to help our customers make better business decisions.
Okay, we made it.
Ooh, almost. The conclusion is
Yeah.
actually an introduction to a conclusion section. So go ahead. Oh, nope, I'm going to tackle this one. So here's some of the, I'll call this an eye chart for some of the startling improvements that an analyst, a consulting company, McKinsey in this case, says if you go digital, you can unlock significant value. And when I look at these, without diving into the specific details, I'll compare and contrast these to what I see in the market and what I see with our own customers. When I see claims from other vendors and companies that are trying to help customers like yourselves improve process and improve their overall manufacturing efficiency, most of those claims are we can improve it by 2% and we can improve it by 3%. The point is it's single digits, whether it's OEE or what other factor. So first glance of these numbers, well, these are really significant, 30 to 50% reduction of machine downtime. But I also contrast that to the numbers that we've seen with our own experience. And so, for example, Wellington was able to reduce their quality errors 90%. The review time, customers routinely go from weeks to hours. So we're talking about 80, 90, 95%. So these are great because it's from another source that says the promise of going digital. Our own experience with our own customers, because I think they're using paper-based batch records, and so they're coming from a further place back. The numbers are even larger than this. So the thing we have to ask ourselves with all this promise of the benefits of going digital, why haven't life science manufacturers gone digital? And that's probably a whole webinar by itself, but I wanted to touch on it. There has to be some reason, and there are multiple reasons from our perspective. Why haven't you gone digital yet, and why haven't the industry as a whole? I still contend we're looking at 90 to 95% of the customers we interact with are still using paper-based batch records. And the number one reason that we come to is they can go electronic and they can go digital, but their number one solution for doing that is called a manufacturing execution system. And on average, they take 16 months to implement, and they are extremely expensive. So while there's a possible solution for it, it's too costly and it takes too much time. The awesome thing about Master Control MX, Manufacturing Excellence, is all these benefits that we've described resolve all those pains, but we have customers that have actually gone live in 30 days, and 60 days is our normal plan that we start with. So it completely has changed the paradigm of, well, yes, I'd like to go digital, but it's too costly. And with the solution that we have today, the number of customers we have coming on board, I think it's evidence that what they were really wanting was they wanted to go digital, but they couldn't afford to do it over 18 months and spend as much as the other systems required. So last one on that. Last
Okay.
proposal.
Yeah, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, people don't believe it, but it's true.
Correct. So conclusion, 3 parting comments. Digitization resolves quality and production challenges. It resolves those production challenges that were there before COVID, but COVID, I think, exacerbated it. It drove us to be socially distanced and have remote work, et cetera. And going digital, for those companies that did go digital before COVID, they were well suited to go through the COVID situation and hopefully continue. It'll be short-lived from here on out, but go through it and have not nearly as many problems as the people that are still paper-based.
And then the second point, a digital production record solution improves data integrity and operational agility. So I talked about this a lot of the benefits that come immediately from a digital system around data integrity, the ability to enforce certain configurations, automatically ensure our steps are complete, for example. All of these options within a digital system are really going to help in this area.
And the last bullet was the teaser at the end of the presentation. It's great to go from paper to digital and gain all of the positive outcomes, but we were just at the front edge of really understanding all the benefits that we'll gain. We call it limitless optimization opportunities. And some of them are just not too far-fetched. If we can do for our manufacturers what Domino's does with their pizza and Amazon does with their deliveries, I think will be a big step forward. And then going beyond that, we can have lots of interesting improvements as well. So thank you for your time and listening in today.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Brian and Katie. That was an amazing presentation. I hope all of the people out there that are watching and listening today found some useful information, some kernels of data that you can take back to your teams and maybe get started on your path to digitization. We have a little bit of time left for Q&A. And one of the comments that Brian was making at the end was about integration with your MES, or even sometimes replacing an MES. So one of the questions we had come out was, you had talked about integration with an ERP. If you already have an MES in place, are there also integration options with an MES?
Your choice. Would you like
Go
to?
for it, Brian.
Okay. So yes, and I'll explain the yes. There's integration opportunities, but what we see is that most customers, because of the expense and time required to implement the MES, they don't implement the MES and gain all of the benefits it provides, except for on their highest volume lines. So if you take a customer that has 20 different products across 3 different sites, maybe they implement the MES for 1 product. And so integration, I would call it more coexistence, meaning MX, we have customers that already have an MES in place and they're looking at implementing MX on all of those lines that haven't been automated by an MES. The other thing to highlight is the MES tends to be more equipment-centric, so it also favors continuous lines. And often in life science manufacturers, you're dealing with batch or discrete processes. So that's another place where MX is looked at more, because MX is more operator-centric. So whenever you have a line or a site that has lots of people playing specific roles in the operation, then that's a great place for MX.
Awesome, thank you. Another question that we had come in really focuses around, you had mentioned the user adoption, right? So the line supervisor is using tablets or using phones, right? They're kind of used to that. Have you had any feedback on the adoption from, say, quality professionals or even from management on the effectiveness or the benefits that they've seen?
Yeah, I can answer that a little bit. Maybe we can tag team.
Perfect.
Yeah, so I think I can definitely speak to the quality group. The adoption is pretty easy with the quality group because I think the benefits, like I mentioned earlier, are just immediate. I was doing a bit of research for one of our insights related projects that Brian alluded to, where we were interviewing many different members of the quality group around their pains with kind of their day in general, but more specifically around the review process of the batch record. And almost all of them mentioned handwriting, missing pages of paper, all of these things that are just automatically taken care of within a digital system. So I think the advantage for those within quality is clear really even before you start implementing the product.
And just another specific example would be the QC person that needs to go out to a line and check on the status of that process. How do they know in a paper-based environment, how do they know when they need to go out there? In a digital environment, they could be monitoring from wherever they are and be notified of when the process gets to a certain step so that that person then knows to go. And so that's just one of the examples I alluded to that highlighted, there's little delays. It's not a full stoppage if the QC person is not ready right then, but it could be minutes, and those minutes add up over time. Jen also mentioned executives. So I think the thing to highlight with the executives would be the real-time visibility, because they're not often out on the shop floor. And so they also have benefited from the dashboards that we share with the line supervisor and others, Robin working remotely. But they also will see the same benefits as being able to just understand where they are in a given process, even if they're out on a soccer field watching a game on Saturdays or wherever they may be.
Awesome. Approving your batch records or monitoring your line while you're at a soccer game. That is work-life integration right there. We've all become more efficient. I think we have time for one more question. The last one you had mentioned at the very end there, implementation is relatively fast and easy with our manufacturing excellence products. Could you expand a little bit more on how you implement so quickly?
Yeah, part of that is the builder tool. So I mentioned a little bit in this presentation about building out the master templates. I didn't get into that in detail, but the builder tool within the Master Controls manufacturing solution is extremely easy and intuitive to use. So generally within a matter of hours, a customer is able to really hit the ground running, understanding the tool. And so that's a certain percentage of the implementation is just building out the template, which can happen in most cases hours, in some cases days. I don't think we've really seen it ever take longer than a week to build out the initial template. And then once you have that, it's really a matter of going through the validation process, getting continual feedback from the end users, and getting everyone to a point where they feel comfortable actually going live.
And just to add a specific example, so traditional execution systems, usually there's a project plan and a team of people custom coding, and it's months long. I mentioned 16 months for the full implementation, but to build the batch record, it's easily to characterize that as months. From an MX implementation perspective, when we're not dealing with COVID, we have one of our consultants go out to our customers for 1 week. There are times when that first batch record is done in the first day of that week. And as Katie mentioned, almost always we have the first batch record completely configured and ready to try out and test within the environment within multiple days of that first week.
You know, there's another thing that we've talked about with our builder template that I think resonates with the group, and that is we can build that template to match your processes and even make that template look familiar to your paper. So a visual that you're already used to working with, or a process that you're already used to working with, there isn't that much of a disconnect between going from the paper to the digital. That's all we have time for today with our questions. If we did not get to your question today, Brian or Katie will follow up with you directly to make sure that everything is addressed. And we thank you for your time today, for joining us to learn about digitization on the manufacturing floor and how that can really help you not only have a safer manufacturing environment, but a very connected manufacturing environment. Have a great day.